we're beginning the Herbgen Lake part, or I don't know how to designate these. The incident, I suppose. The incident. The Herbgen Lake incident, Montana, United States of America, August 9th, 1949, of Magic Eyes Only, Earth's Encounters with Extraterrestrial Technology by Ryan S. Wood. When two unidentified aerial objects reportedly crashed in the vicinity of Herbgen Lake, Montana in August 1949, the Air Force swung into action, and although a limited degree of official documentation on this particular case has been declassified, the full story remains either unresolved or still hidden behind the closed doors of officialdom. In a one-page incoming message from Great Falls Air Force Base, Montana to Air Materiel Command at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio, dated 17th August 1949, the incident is as follows. The office advised on 9 August 1949 that 7 flying discs had been sighted at Herbgen Lake, Montana at 0930 hours. That date, 2 of the discs were alleged to have crashed, one on the lake and the other on the opposite shore in a wooded area. 2 agents of this office dragged the lake with negative results. Informant and only actual eyewitnesses, while absolutely trustworthy, is prone to exaggeration. He stated discs were all a little larger than an auto tire, of a grayish color, and either having a hole in the center or being painted dark in the center. The informant was not capable of estimating speed, but agents estimated from description that discs were traveling in excess of 1,000 miles per hour. Objects were reported traveling in southwesterly direction. A check of winds aloft for a period revealed a generally southeasterly direction and of a maximum velocity of 24 knots per hour. No unusual atmospheric phenomena were evident on 9 August. Sky conditions were clear and visibility unlimited. Information described sound of an object as being similar to a siren. Request advice of detailed report desired. One statement in the memo does not ring true. 2 agents dragged the lake. Given the fact the lake is 16 miles long and 4 miles wide, it would be impossible for 2 agents to drag the entire lake. Maybe the memo intended to say that they dragged the lake where the witnesses said the object entered. To date, as with so many other raw intelligence reports described within this book, this case has not been resolved. At least not publicly. Does Herbgen Lake, Montana still hold its prized secret, or was this case little more than a false alarm? Perhaps time and new systematic search of the location will finally lay this case to rest. Next incident, Sierra Madre, Mexico, late 1940s. In November 1949, Sam Petok, writing in the Los Angeles Free Press, reported an alleged UFO crashed somewhere in the mountains of Sierra Madre, Mexico, in the late 1940s. The details were brief, however. According to Petok, the story had come from a Los Angeles businesswoman named Alma Lawson, who had in turn received details from a sober and conservative scientist friend that at the time Lawson declined to identify. 3 decades later, however, researcher William Steinman tracked down Alma Lawson, who, according to Steinman, identified her scientist friend as none other than Dr. Luis Walter Alvarez, a professor of physics at the University of California, Berkeley, who worked on the Manhattan Project and who was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1968. Steinman wrote to Alvarez on 3 May 1984, but received no reply. Next incident, Del Rio, Texas, December 1950. On 8 December 1950, the FBI office at Richmond issued the following urgent teletype message to Bureau headquarters at Washington, D.C. Flying saucers. This office very confidentially advised by Army Intelligence Richmond that they have been put on immediate high alert for any data whatsoever concerning flying saucers. CIC here states background of instruction not available from Air Force intelligence, who are not aware of reason for alert locally, but any information whatsoever must be telephoned by them immediately to Air Force intelligence. CIC advises data strictly confidential as should not be disseminated. Precisely what led to the issuing of this high alert remains unknown. Officially, and according to whistleblower testimony and documentation, however, the alert followed the crash and subsequent retrieval of a UFO in Mexico in the same time frame. For example, in an affidavit originally filed with the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomenon, NICAP, that shows now that is now housed in the archives of the Center for UFO Studies, see UFOs. Retired Air Force Colonel Robert Willingham confirmed his knowledge of the detection on radar and subsequent crash of an object of unknown origin south of Laredo, Texas, at the time in question. According to Wilhelm, he and a co-pilot were able to fly a light aircraft to the crash site that was secured by armed guards before being waved off, although Willingham did not see the crashed object itself. He did retrieve a piece of metal from the site that looked like a magnesium steel. I tried to heat it. It just wouldn't melt. Then Willingham said he took the debris to a Marine Corps metallurgy laboratory in Hagerstown, Maryland, where the debris mysteriously vanished and the trail went cold. Researcher Bruce Maccabee states the investigation Todd Zetchell investigated Willingham's story. It was Zetchell's opinion that the crash occurred on December 5. The recovery occurred on December 6. A general alert to counterintelligence was sent out on December 7, and the FBI learned about it on December 8. Maccabee added, Zetchell told this author that in 1978 he and a Japanese TV documentary team chartered a plane and flew with Colonel Willingham to the location of the crash. It was roughly in the vicinity of Del Rio, Texas. It is important to note that Willingham provided his sworn affidavit in 1977, a full year before Stanton Friedman spoke with Major Jesse Marcel and the subsequent development of the Roswell case. That usual aerial activity was reported in the same time frame at issue is not in doubt. In his book, Present at the Creation, former U.S. Secretary of State Dean Acheson stated that on the morning of 6 December 1950, our early warning radar system in Canada had picked up formations of unidentified objects, presumably aircraft heading southeast on a course that could bring them over Washington in 2 or 3 hours. All interception and defense forces were alerted. In the book Wise Men by Walter Isaacson and Evan Thomas, a similar scenario is presented, with the fear expressed within official circles that the unknown targets were Russian planes. And in Memoirs of Harry S. Truman, Years of Trial and Hope, 1946 through 1952, the former president himself confirmed that radar screens of some air defense installations in the far north were reporting large formations of unidentified planes approaching. The usual radar returns would shortly thereafter be firmly dismissed amid stories about misidentifications of flocks of geese and unusual disturbance in the Arctic atmosphere, and even U.S. military aircraft being mistaken for enemy planes. Notably, a reference of this particular crash appeared in the Majestic 12 Eisenhower briefing document EBD. According to the extract from the EBD, on 6 December 1950, a second object, probably similar origin, impacted the Earth at high speed in the El Indio Guerrero area of the Texas-Mexican border, after following a long trajectory through the atmosphere. By the time a search team arrived, what remained of the object had been almost totally incinerated. Much material as could be recovered was transported to the Atomic Energy Commission facility at Sandita, New Mexico. Neat how they have that Q clearance that is separate from DOD, DOJ. You need to have a Q clearance to be able to get into any of that. Investigations by the author of the 1950 White House switchboard phone log shows that phone traffic nearly doubled on 6 December 1950. Based on the phone records, it is logical to believe that the following people were aware of the UFO incident, its subsequent crash, and military recovery: Sidney Sowers, James E. Webb, William Stewart Stymington, Dean Acheson, Robert A. Levitt, J. Edgar Hoover, Omar Bradley, and George C. Marshall. Further intense research may shed additional light on this intriguing affair, particularly as there is a high degree of credible witness testimony in the form of a first-hand account, and the recollections of none other than the former President Harry S. Truman and Secretary of State Dean Acheson. On to the next incident. Edwards Air Force Base, California, 1952. In the UFO Ohio Yearbook, 1979, Leonard Stringfield wrote, "My information for one known UFO crash incident in 1952 comes from a reliable person in a technical position at a large General Electric plant. His brother was on duty as a radar specialist at Edwards Air Force Base, California in 1952 when he saw a UFO descending toward Earth at a great speed. When the UFO had been confirmed to have crashed, the captain on duty gave him instructions. You didn't see anything." According to the brief data imparted to Stringfield, the UFO had crashed in an unspecified desert location near Edwards Air Force Base, was more than 50 feet in diameter, and was occupied by dead humanoid bodies approximately 4.5 feet tall, all of which were later transferred to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base for study. San Miguel County, New Mexico, USA, spring 1952. Without doubt, one of the strangest but notably documented alleged UFO crash incidents occurred in the New Mexico desert in early 1952. The case is puzzling in the sense that there are but two possibilities. Either the event occurred precisely as the witness claimed, or it was the product of a deluded mind. Interestingly, official records chronicle the event in its entirety, but leave open to interpretation the truth of the affair. In a 13 November 1952 document titled "Unconventional Flying Objects Sighted," and portions recovered by, first name deleted, McLean, Friona, Texas, prepared by the Air Force Office of Special Investigations at Tinker Air Force Base, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, and markedly for the attention of the Director of Investigations at Washington, D.C., the following was disclosed. 1. Synopsis. Special Agent in Charge, Dallas, Texas Field Division, FBI, advised this district that, first name deleted, McLean of Friona, Texas, had reported seeing flying saucers at an unnamed point in New Mexico, had recovered 3 fragments which landed close to him, and had notified the Pentagon, but hearing nothing, had sold a portion of one object to wait a minute and had notified the Pentagon, but hearing nothing, had sold a portion of one object to a Russian scientist from the USSR embassy. 2. Details. A. FBI received information to the effect that McLean had written a letter to an unnamed friend in Amarillo, Texas, and it read in part as follows. B. But to get back to flying saucers that are real, recently I was camped on a mountain in New Mexico and saw a dim light at first circling around up high. It was circled a mile across, but kept descending. First the light was white, but as it got lower it turned green and exploded, showering light objects in all directions. Several of those fiery objects landed close to me. Most of them were buried in the ground, but I gathered up 3 that were only partially buried and brought them home with me. C. I notified the Pentagon in Washington what I had saw fall. I heard nothing from them, but from a Russian scientist from the USSR embassy did come and buy 1/2 of one of those objects. It was so hard we had to use a sledgehammer to break into. In the center was a round hole or vacuum field with fine powder. The center scraped every bit of the dust up and put it in a bottle. He claims the object was uranium and other unknown minerals. The document continues. Mr. and Mrs. McLean, Friona, Texas, were interviewed and Mr. McLean advised that he was a retired farmer. He stated that he had always been interested in meteors ever since he took a correspondence course concerning meteors some 50 years ago. McLean stated that in the spring of 1952, he was traveling in the eastern part of San Miguel County, New Mexico, with his wife when he found a large deposit of metal unknown to him. He stated that he picked up a piece of this metal and brought it back to Friona, Texas with him. Mrs. McLean verified this statement inasmuch as she stated that she was with him and at the time he picked up the metal. McLean was questioned concerning his statement in the above letter that he saw the material fall, but stated that he did not remember writing any such information in the letter and emphatically stated that he did not see the material fall to earth. McLean stated that after he found this material and returned to Friona, Texas, he wrote letters to Senator Lyndon B. Johnson of Texas and Senator Clinton Anderson of New Mexico concerning the material. He stated that both senators replied requesting that he ship samples of this material to a government laboratory in Tucson, Arizona. McLean stated that he sent samples of this material to the government laboratory in Tucson, Arizona, and stated that they replied advising him that the material was part of a meteor. McLean was asked if he were still in possession of all this correspondence, but stated that he had destroyed it all. McLean advised that shortly after he wrote to the 2 senators about this material, he was visited by an unknown individual who, according to McLean, displayed the credentials of the Soviet embassy. McLean was asked to describe the credentials of this person and stated that they were very similar to the credentials of the writer, but that the writing was in Russian. McLean was then asked if he could read the writer's credentials, and he stated that he could not read very well, but he felt sure that they were in English. McLean could not place the time of this visit and could furnish no other information concerning this alleged individual, with the exception of the fact that he stated that he thought this individual came from the Russian consulate in Amarillo, Texas. McLean stated he was no longer in possession of any of the unknown material, inasmuch as he had recently given the remainder of the material to his wife's nephew, Mr. Deleted of Lawrenceville, Illinois. It was also pointed out that in the letter set out above, McLean advised that he sold half of the material to the representatives of the Russian embassy. At the time of the interview, he emphatically denied selling any of the material to the representative of the Russian embassy and stated that he could not remember having made much a statement in the letter to the individual in Amarillo, Texas. Deputy Sheriff C.M. Jones, Friona, advised that he had known the subject for many years, and advised that the subject is an elderly man approximately 71 years of age. Jones advised that the subject has nothing whatsoever to do and is somewhat of a dreamer. Jones explained that McLean dreams of various things and then thinks about them to the extent that he actually believes what he dreamed. Jones stated that the subject will then come to the downtown section of the little town of Friona and attempted to convince people that his dreams are actually the truth. Jones stated that the people of Friona, Texas, very seldom believe or put any faith in any matters discussed by the subject due to his mental condition. Jones stated that the subject is entirely loyal to the United States, but has merely reached that age in life where his mind has begun to deteriorate. An examination of the available documentation might suggest that the entire controversy was purely the creation of an elderly, confused, and fading mind. And perhaps it was. It should not be forgotten, however, that the discovery of the large deposit of a metal unknown and at San Miguel County, New Mexico, was confirmed to the Air Force by McLean's wife, who was apparently of sound mind. Therefore, that something was recovered by McLean does seem likely. In addition, the reference to the alleged mysterious Russian scientist from the USSR embassy that purportedly visited McLean and departed with some of the recovered material had something of a man in black air to it. More than half a century on, and with the key player in the case long departed, this event remains intriguingly unresolved. Next incident, Spitsbergen, Norway, early 1952. In June 1952, a CIA intelligence report made note of a German magazine article that described an unusual flying saucer in Norway, according to the CIA. Writing in the German magazine Der Pfleger, Dr. Waldemar Beck says that a flying saucer which recently fell at Spitsbergen had been studied by eminent Norwegian and German rocket experts. He writes that Dr. Norshell, a Norwegian expert in rocket construction, went to the place where the flying saucer had fallen a few hours after it had been discovered in the mountains of Spitsbergen by Norwegian jet planes. In the wreck of the apparatus, the expert is said to have discovered a radio piloting transmitter with a nucleus of plutonium transmitting on all wavelengths with 934 Hz, a measure that had been unknown so far. The investigation has also shown that the flying saucer crashed because of a defect in the radio piloting system. The saucer, which carried no crew, has a diameter of 47 meters. The steel used in the construction is an unknown alloy. It consists of an exterior disc provided at its peripheral with 46 automatic jets. The disk pivots around the central sphere, which contains the measurement and remote equipment. The measurement instructions have an inscription in Russian. 3 years later, in 1955, the Stuttgart-based newspaper Stuttgart Tagblatt reported, Oslo, Norway, September 4, 1955. Only now a board of inquiry of the Norwegian General Staff is preparing publication of a report on the examination of the remains of a UFO crash near Spitsbergen. Presumably in early 1952, chairman of the board, Colonel Gernot Darmbiel, during an instruction for Air Force officers, stated the crashing of the Spitsbergen disk was highly important, although our present scientific knowledge does not permit us to solve all the riddles. I am confident that these remains from Spitsbergen will be of utmost importance in this respect. Colonel Darnbiel was further quoted as saying, some time ago, a misunderstanding was caused by saying that the disk was of Soviet origin. It has this, we wish to state emphatically, not been built on Earth. The materials used in its construction are completely unknown to all experts who participated in the investigation. The Stuttgart Tagblatt had still more to impart. According to Colonel Darnbiel, the Board of Inquiry is not going to publish an extensive report until some sensational facts have been discussed with U.S. and British experts. We should reveal what we found, as misplaced secrecy might lead to panic. The newspaper continued. Contrary to information from American and other sources, Second Lieutenant Brobs and Tellenson, who have been assigned as special observers of the Arctic region since the events at Spitsbergen, report the flying discs have landed in the polar regions several times, said Lieutenant Tillinson. I think that the Arctic is serving as a kind of air base for the unknowns, especially during snowstorms when we are forced back to our bases. I have seen them land and take off on 3 separate occasions. I noticed that after having landed, they execute a speedy rotation around their disks, a brilliant glow of light, the intensity of which is variable with regard to speed at landing and at takeoff, prevents any views of these things happening behind the curtain of light and or inside the disk itself. Sounds like the Nazi Arctic South Pole base, huh? And Antarctic base. How much of this fantastic information can be authenticated and considered reliable? In 1985, the British researcher Philip Mantle looked into the case and was informed by the Norwegian government that nothing even remotely resembled the Spitsbergen crash had ever occurred. The whole story seemed utterly unfounded. Mantle was told by Arlis Iseg, the head of the Information Division, Norwegian Royal Ministry of Defense. Furthermore, several of those people cited in both newspaper articles and official intelligence summaries of newspaper articles on the Spitsbergen story simply did not exist. However, Spitsbergen still refused to roll over and die. William Moore, co-author and with Charles Berlitz of the Roswell incident, spoke with the French investigator Jean Sider, who had uncovered a clipping from a newspaper in Nancy, France, that referred to a Nazi-developed craft constructed in the closing stages of World War II, the description of which sounded remarkably like the object recovered at Spitsbergen. But the most baffling addition to the Spitsbergen saga came from the U.S. National Security Agency. Under the terms of the Freedom of Information Act, the NSA has declared a transition of a Russian Novosti press agency article on UFOs titled Flying Saucers, They're a Myth. Contained within the article is a small section that reads, "An abandoned silvery disc was found in the deep rock coal seams in Norwegian coal mines on Spitsbergen. It was pierced and marked by micrometeor impacts and bore all traces of having performed a long space voyage. It was sent for analysis to the Pentagon and disappeared there." Notably, prior to its declassification, the section of the article translation that referred to Spitsbergen was carefully circled with a pen by an unknown source at the NSA with the word "plant." Although many researchers have, with some justification, dismissed the Spitsbergen case as a UFO crash retrieval hoax because of the proven fact that several of those cited in then contemporary newspaper articles on the case were outright products of fiction. The "plant" reference suggests that the case may have been the product of U.S. intelligence, designed to cloud and confuse even further the murky world of UFO crash retrieval accounts. I need to see who's texting me. Okay, next incident. Silver Spring, Maryland, U.S., July 1952. The only current available source for the data relating to this case is a one-page Air Force Office of Special Investigation, AFOSI, document of July 23, 1952, which details the following. On 22nd July 1952, Colonel Smith, Executive Officer, Directorate of Intelligence, U.S. Air Force, advised that his office had just received a call from the above-captioned individual and that he was concerned over some object that apparently fallen in a wooded area behind his home. According to Colonel Smith, Mr. DeLeader resides on Lay Hill Road, Silver Spring, Maryland, and is employed by some Buick company in the Silver Spring area. Colonel Smith further stated that Mr. DeLeader reported this incident to the local police on 19 July 1952. The date of the incident occurred, but having received no satisfaction, decided to call the Air Force on 22nd July 1952. I telephonically communicated the above information to Colonel White, District Commander DO Number 4. Gilbert R. Levy, Chief Counterintelligence Division Director of Special Investigations, the Inspector General. I guess that was supposed to be a note or something. Interestingly and potentially significant is the fact that this particular event occurred at the same time that a now famous wave of UFO encounters was occurring over the United States Capitol. Even more significant is the testimony of Canadian government engineers Wilbert Smith, who stated in an interview conducted with ufological truth, okay, I've just never seen this word before, conducted with ufological truth seekers almost 10 years later, that the July 1952 wave, the U.S. Air Force retrieved a piece of debris which had been shot from a small flying saucer near Washington in July 1952. Smith asserted that he had a piece of priceless wreckage in his possession at one point and that he showed it to his close friend. U.S. Navy Rear Admiral H.B. Knowles said, Smith, I showed it to the Admiral. It was a piece of metal about twice the size of your thumb, which had been loaned to me for a very short time by the U.S. Air Force. As a general thing, they differ only in that they are much harder than our materials. It was, in reality, a matrix of magnesium orthosilicate. The matrix had great numbers, thousands of 15-micron spheres scattered throughout it. Asked if he returned the piece of debris to the Air Force, Smith replied, "Not the Air Force, much higher than that." Pressed for further answers concerning the possibility that the organization to which the material was returned was the CIA, Smith replied, "I'm sorry, gentlemen, but I don't care to go beyond that point. I can say to you that it went into the hands of a highly classified group. You will have to solve that problem, their identity, for yourselves." Taking into consideration Smith's comments about crashed saucer debris recovered in July 1952 by the Air Force, one has to wonder if the intelligence report on 23 July 1952, as cited above, was describing the fall from the sky of the exact piece of debris that the Air Force would ultimately locate and of which Smith had first-hand knowledge. Next incident, Braxton County, West Virginia, September 1952. On the evening of September 12, 1952, fireballs were sighted over a wide area in the eastern United States. At about 7 p.m., one passed over Baltimore, Maryland, not far from the nation's capital. At almost the same time, reports of another came in from Kingsport, Tennessee, as well as Wheeling and Parksburg, West Virginia. 15 minutes later, a few people in the small town of Flatwoods, West Virginia, saw that they described as a meteor passing over their town, an odd meteor, if that is what it was, since it pulsed with light and appeared to land. A group consisting of one adult and 6 children of varying ages trekked up to the spot where the landing had apparently occurred. There they noticed a foggy mist and a strange nauseating odor that burned their nostrils and throats. They shone a flashlight in the area and saw a huge man-like creature over 10 feet tall, with an oversized fiery orange head and protruding eyes. The being emitted beams of light and moved towards them as if floating through the air. One person fainted but quickly recovered. Then everyone ran. The Braxton County Sheriff arrived at Flatwoods later that evening, scoffed at the story, and refused to go up the hill. Others did go up, including some reporters, and all detected a strong metallic stench. The first reporter on the scene did not think the witnesses were lying, but did assume that they were mistaken. The sheriff finally climbed the hill the next evening and encountered the odor. In the tall grass was a 15-foot circular area in which the grass was flattened and the ground depressed. Before long, a number of other people visited the area. Interestingly, researcher, zoologist, and future UFO author Ivan Sanderson arrived to investigate the Flatwoods case on 18 September. He found the witnesses credible, but believed the stench to be one often encountered in organic chemistry laboratories. It almost surely derived from the grass indigenous to that area. Still, the grass did smell a bit too strongly, he admitted, and there were other oddities as well. Immediately above the circle, he saw a patch of vegetation that seemed suddenly to have turned brown. Some leaves from a vine he picked up were burned at the edges instead of having died from the stem out. It also appeared that the objects descended vertically, not at an angle the way a small meteor would have. Sanderson researched the other sightings in the area that night. He determined that all of the objects were traveling in the same direction, about the same speed, spaced several miles apart from each other. He found other people who claimed to see apparent landings. One was 10 miles southwest of Flatwoods, where a flaming object crashed into the wooded side of a steep hill. Another witness was puzzled by smoke that hung around a hill that night and claimed his brother had seen a low flying bright object make a neat turn. All of this prompted Sanderson to conclude that a flight of intelligently controlled objects flew over West Virginia. The Air Force also sent 2 investigators to Flatwoods, who concluded that the officials had seen a meteor, then the glowing eyes of an owl, and had just gotten hysterical. Such a finding, however inaccurate or deceptive, may have been calculated to pacify a populace still aroused over the spectacular USO flap that had besieged Washington, D.C. in July 1952. Only 2 months earlier, the Air Force conclusions are also consistent with the 1954 Special Operations Manual's guidelines for keeping the public in the dark. Meteors, downed satellites, weather balloons, and military aircraft are all acceptable alternatives to admitting that a UFO may have impacted the Earth. A major challenge with the Flatwoods case is the apparent absurdity of the creature as described by the witnesses, coupled with the universal acknowledgement by all investigators, including skeptics, that the witnesses were not hoaxing. Yet, by stepping back and looking at the larger context and other evidence, a clear picture emerges. Of significant note is the linkage of this case to the Majic documents, specifically the President-elect Eisenhower briefing document, EBD, of 18 November 1952 by Admiral Roscoe Hillenkotter regarding Operation Majestic 12. The EDB states on page 5, implications for national security are of continuing importance in that motives and ultimate intentions of these visitors remain completely unknown. In addition, a significant upsurge in the surveillance activity of these craft, beginning in May 1952 and continuing through the autumn of this year, has caused considerable concern that new developments may be imminent. The upsurge in UFO activity and the West Virginia crash event itself are the subject of a definitive new book, Braxton County Monster, by Frank C. Freshino. Junior Freshino became hooked on the story and dug deeper, traveling all over the countryside, interviewing witnesses, and poring over countless government documents, books, and old newspaper articles. He also gained the trust of several Braxton County first-hand witnesses to the event, who opened up to him and told their story for the first time in 50 years. The result is a compelling set of in-depth evaluations of both private and public records, supporting this single event as one in a series of UFO crashes during a period of heightened UFO activity. More than just a detailed study of the monster event, the book uniquely establishes a pattern of connections to other UFO activity of the day, along with unambiguous cover-up actions by the military. Freshino goes on in later chapters to describe stunning reports of extensive air-to-air combat, with attendant loss of aircraft and life. With the possible exception of reports from Soviet Air Force personnel, such battles have never before been written up. It is axiomatic that if the U.S. forces did successfully shoot down some of the UFOs, we would have scrambled to recover them. In this light, the numerous reports of crashed or downed craft compiled by Leonard Stringfield perhaps take on new perspective. Finding the death record of a pilot killed on 12 December 1952 is one stunning result of Freshino's exhaustive research. The fact that General Benjamin Chidlaw of Air Defense Command, Ent Air Force Base, New Mexico, signed the regret letter is fascinating because Ent Air Force Base was where Harry Bob Cooper, father of Tim Cooper, conduit of many majestic document leaks, was stationed when he received his commendation for his contributions to the U.S. Air Force's UFO program. See facsimile in the color insert section. Ficino's speculation about the events of that night is a gripping and highly believable portrayal of an unknown battle with a fleet of 16 UFOs. Fortunately, if Freshino is correct, our aircraft and pilot losses were essentially all the result of UFO self-defense. The huge cover-up of this battle, elements of which must have been observed by civilians on the ground, undoubtedly pose a daunting challenge to the responsible for keeping the public aware of the real events of 12 December 1952. Next incident, New Mexico, USA, 1953. Sent to the now defunct NICAP organization in April 1964, the following letter describes an event that, according to the letter writer K.A., a student at Bob Jones University, maybe Kansas, occurred in New Mexico on an undetermined date in 1953. It reads, "Here at school there is an instructor who during the Korean conflict was an adjunct to an Army Air Corps general at one of our New Mexico proving grounds. I got the following story from him. In 1953, a flying saucer crash-landed near the proving grounds. Air Force personnel immediately rushed to the area and found the saucer unharmed and unoccupied with doors open. Upon searching the surrounding area, they came upon the bodies of the saucer's 4 occupants, all dead. Shortly after this, certain top-level personnel were given the true saucer story by Air Force officials. In his capacity, my source was included in this. They were shown the bodies of the 4 occupants of the ship, which he described as from 3 to 4 feet tall, hairless, and otherwise quite human in appearance. An autopsy had been performed on one of them to determine the cause of death. No cause for their deaths were ever found. Also, at this time, they were shown 3 saucers, which the Air Force has. He described them as ovoid, with a length of 25 feet and a width of 13 feet. They were shown the interior as well. And there were no visible means of control, no visible means of propulsion. He told me that since that time, the Air Force has been working intensively, though unsuccessfully, at trying to discover the means of propulsion. In 1977, a result of K.A.'s lead, researcher Richard Hall met with Lieutenant Colonel, who appeared to have knowledge of this case. The officer advised Hall that he had seen firsthand 4 alien bodies at Langley Air Force Base that had been recovered from a crash in 1953 near White Sands, New Mexico. Next incident, Kingman, Arizona, USA, May 1953. The genesis of the Kingman crash story can be traced back to 3 February 1971, the date that 2 men with an interest in UFOs, Jeff Young and Paul Chetham, conducted an interview with a source that investigator Ray Fowler would later refer to by the pseudonym Fritz Werner, and who claimed knowledge of a crashed UFO and alien bodies recovered near Kingman, Arizona on May 21, 1953. Chatham and Young were the first people within the UFO research community to speak with the source, and brief aspects of the story and interview were published in the Framingham, Massachusetts edition of the Middlesex News on April 1973. According to the newspaper, Jeff Young had interviewed a man who asserted that he had worked with Project Blue Book and had made contact with an alien craft. The source, according to Young and Chatham, claimed that he had been at the site of a UFO crash at Kingman, Arizona. Approximately 22 years previously, he identified himself as a graduate engineer with degrees in mathematics and physics and a master's degree in engineering. In the specific part of the interview with Young and Chatham that dealt with the Kingman crash, the source stated, "The object was not built by anything obviously that we know about on Earth. At that time, I was out of the atomic test. At that time, I was out of the atomic testing, but I was still with the Air Force, and this was the time I was on Blue Book. There was a report that there was a crash of an unexplained vehicle in the West, and they organized a team of about 40 of us. I was one of those 40. The source went on to inform Young and Chatham that he had been alerted through official channels and on a private phone line from the base commander at Wright Field saying that you're a member of Blue Book and we would like for you tomorrow to get on a plane, go to Chicago, and from there to Phoenix. The source further advised Young and Chatham that the object was more like a teardrop-shaped cigar. It was like a streamlined cigar. With respect to a body or bodies found at the scene, the source added, I saw the creature that you were talking about. It was real and I would guess about 4 feet tall. He also stated that the body was dark brown in color, and he offered the theory that perhaps the creature's skin had darkened due to the atmospheric exposure. Researcher and author Ray Fowler learned of the Kingman case from the Middlesex News and tracked down the witness himself in a determined effort to uncover the truth. In his book, Casebook of a UFO Investigator, Fowler stated, in 1973, I came even closer to documenting the reality of crashed UFOs with a signed affidavit from an alleged member of the United States Air Force investigating team. He must remain anonymous. I've dubbed him Fritz Werner. Werner's signed affidavit to Fowler follows. I, Fritz Werner, do solemnly swear that during a special assignment with the U.S. Air Force on May 21st, 1953, I assisted in the investigation of a crashed unknown object in the vicinity of Kingman, Arizona. The object was constructed of an unfamiliar metal which resembled brushed aluminum. It had impacted 20 inches into the sand without any sign of structural damage. It was oval and about 30 feet in diameter, and an entranceway hatch had been vertically lowered and opened. It was about 3.5 feet high and about 1.5 feet wide. I was able to talk briefly with someone on the team who did look inside only briefly. He saw 2 swivel seats, an oval cabin, and a lot of instruments and displays. A tent pitched near the object sheltered the dead remains of the only occupant of the craft. It was about 4 feet tall, dark brown complexion, and had 2 eyes, 2 nostrils, 2 ears, and a small round mouth. It was clothed in a silvery metallic suit and wore a skull cap of the same material. It wore no face covering or helmet. I certify that the above statement is true by affixing my signature to this document this day of June 7, 1973, according to Ray Fowler. I watched Mr. Werner carefully read and signed the final piece of documentation to a 65-page report I had prepared for NICAP. Although no additional witnesses could be found, the peripheral names, positions, tests, dates, and places mentioned within Mr. Werner's personal account all check out exceptionally well. To pin down the exact date of the crash, Fritz mentioned that he may have written something in his diary at that time. After a search, he found the penciled diary that he kept meticulously in those days. When I examined its pages, there was no doubt as to its authenticity. My eyes then skipped over to the entry on May 21st. Up at 7 o'clock, worked most of the day on Frenchmen with cubicles. Letter from Bet. Letter from Bet. She's feeling better now, thank goodness. Got picked up at Indian Springs Air Force Base for a job I can't write or talk about. In his 1978 paper, Retrievals of the Third Kind, presented at the annual MUFON Symposium of that year, Leonard Stringfield related the account of a researcher, Charles Wilhelm, whose father had been told an account by a Major Daly of his Daly's flight to the site of a UFO crash in April 1953. Daly was then blindfolded and driven out to a desert location that was hot and sandy. Inside a tent, the blindfold was removed, and he was taken to another location where he saw a metallic ship 25 to 30 feet in diameter, and that was undamaged. According to Stringfield and Wilhelm, Major Daly spent 2 days analyzing the UFO and stated that it was not made on Earth. Daly stated that at no time was he allowed to enter the UFO. However, it did have a hatch or opening that was 4 to 5 feet in height and 2 to 3 feet wide, and which was open. After concluding his analysis, Daly was taken from the area by escort. Given the closeness of the date to the Kingman crash, it is not inconceivable that Daly was mistaken in his recollection of the date by just 1 month, rather than in April 1953. In his paper, The UFO Crash Retrieval Syndrome, published in 1980 by the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, Leonard Stringfield referenced a case that closely matched the story of the Kingman crash, and that focused upon the interview Stringfield conducted in 1977 with a pilot who had knowledge of a UFO crash in Arizona in 1953. Significantly, both the year and location of the Kingman crash, I have seen the body, Stringfield was told while the pair scanned a map of the state of Arizona. I don't know the exact location, Stringfield's informant advised him, adding, I'm almost positive it happened in 1953. In his February 1994 paper, UFO Crash Retrievals, Search for Proof in a Hall of Mirrors, Leonard Stringfield provided yet further data in support of the 1953 UFO crash at Kingman, Arizona. Stated Stringfield, my new source, JLD, a resident of Ohio, north of Cincinnati, in a surprising disclosure, claimed that a close relative of the late Mr. Hawley, who had served in the top command in a Defense Department capacity at Wright-Patterson in 1953, told him about one of the 2 crashes in Arizona. He also told him 3 bodies, 1 severely burned, and parts of the wrecked craft were delivered to the base. Investigator Don Schmidt spoke with a woman named Judy Woolcott, who had an intriguing tale to tell concerning the Kingman crash that centered on a strange letter that Woolcott had retrieved in 1965 from her husband, who was serving in Vietnam at the time. According to Woolcott, her husband told her that he had seen something strange 12 years previously. Wolcott thought that the incident dated from August 1953, and while she could not be exactly certain of the month, she was certain that the location was Kingman, Arizona. Her husband was a military officer and was on duty in the airbase control tower when something strange was picked up on radar. It began to lose altitude and disappear from the screen. Wolcott informed Schmidt that her husband had said that various military police began talking about something being down, and both her husband and a number of military personnel left the base in jeeps and headed for the location where the object was believed crashed. Finally, they located a domed disc that had evidently hit the ground with some force, embedding itself in the sand. There was no external damage to the object at all and no sign of debris on the ground. Before they had a chance to close in on the object, however, Wolcott's husband and his colleagues were escorted from the area and told to never discuss the incident with anyone. There was no indication as to what had caused the crash, and Wolcott's husband did not see any bodies. However, he did advise his wife that some of the military police had said there were casualties and that they were not human. He further advised that his wife, with regard to the bodies, he had only heard the talk. Yeah, that's it for today. We'll pick up on all this tomorrow.